Troy. Here's a kind of a forgotten movie, one of the biggest budgeted flicks in Brad Pitt's career. I'm actually a little surprised people don't talk about this more, but there are reasons why people don't know. Anyway, I want to discuss. I'm going to be talking about the director's cut and the kind of the movie and its relationship to the Iliad, which it claims to be an adaptation of. Not really. Homer's Iliad, the classic poem. Anyway, Troy.
Nearly 3,000 years ago, the passion for one woman ignited the greatest battle ever fought for love.
I want her back. Will you go to war with me, brother?
We're sending the largest fleet that ever sailed.
We need the greatest warrior.
Okay, so Troy was made during this post-Gladiator boom of sword and sandals epics. There weren't a lot of them because they were so expensive to make and none of them were particularly successful. But Gladiator, which the Ridley Scott movie that starred Russell Crowe, was such a big and surprising hit that Hollywood, of course, immediately wanted to cash in on this. So they rushed a few movies that were somewhat similar to Gladiator into production. Ridley Scott even did a couple more with Kingdom of Heaven and Robin Hood, which was sort of retrofitted into being a Gladiator sequel, from what I could tell. But Troy was kind of the biggest of all of them. It had, I think, actually a $200 million budget, which is massive, especially in the early 2000s. And it was really heavily hyped. Now, one of the things that this movie was talked about the most was the fact that Brad Pitt bulked up for it. Now, Brad Pitt actually isn't that big in this movie, but he's bigger than he was in Fight Club. I mean, Brad Pitt usually kind of stays sort of lean muscle. He doesn't get real mass. So he is noticeably larger here, and he plays Achilles, the legendary warrior from the Battle of Troy. So this movie has a pretty good ensemble, pretty good, not great ensemble cast, but one thing you'll notice right away is that Brad Pitt's character Achilles is maybe kind of a weird choice to make the lead of the film. If you're familiar with the story of the Illiad, or just the Trojan War in general, you know that Achilles really wasn't the most important part of the battle. The battle didn't start because of him, it didn't end because of him. He was just a very notable warrior in the battle. Now, a lot of people would say he was the greatest warrior of the time, but still, he doesn't propel very much in this. So the movie really goes out of its way to make Achilles seem very important, but because the movie both starts before the Iliad, Homer's Iliad, and ends well after the Iliad would have ended. The Iliad actually ends with a funeral, the funeral of Hector. So it covers a lot of ground that wasn't in the Iliad. But anyway, so the movie starts with showing Achilles as the ultimate warrior. He kills this giant guy for Agamemnon and establishes that he's got a bad relationship with King Agamemnon, who is the most powerful king of the time. He's a king of basically all of Greece. He's played by Brian Cox, the famous character actor from The Ring and Manhunter, a few other things. And Brian Cox was pretty in demand at this time. So Achilles does his little intro thing, and then it kind of gets into the inciting incident for the Trojan War, which is Paris falling in love with the wife of the brother of Agamemnon, Menelaus, whose name is Helen of Troy. She becomes Helen of Troy because she leaves with Paris. She leaves Menelaus for the son of the king of Troy. So the son of the king of Troy is Paris, and he's played by Orlando Bloom. The king of Troy is played by Peter O'Toole. Now, Orlando Bloom from the Pirates of the Caribbean, the Lord of the Rings franchises, and Peter O'Toole, Lawrence of Arabia, legendary actor. So Paris makes off with Helen, who's played by Diane Kruger, major breakthrough role. She was not a known actress at all before this movie. This movie was very significant for her career. I've seen her pop up and stuff since then. I mostly know her from Inglourious Basterds, the blonde lady. I haven't seen that movie forever. I can't really remember what her role in it was, but I know she was in it. But so Paris goes on with Helen. Menelaus essentially runs crying to his brother Agamemnon and says, "I need your help to get my wife back. A dishonor to me is a dishonor to you, and dishonor to all Greece," which is true. I mean, Paris essentially knew he was starting a war. His brother Hector, played by Eric Bana, even points that out. You know, Eric Bana Eric Bana's a guy whose career never quite happened. It should have, and I really like the guy, but it just he never quite got that role that would propel him. Because he was in Ang Lee's Hulk that no one liked, the one that came out before the Edward Norton Hulk, and then he was in the Steven Spielberg movie Munich, and this, but it just never quite happened for him. The last thing I saw him in was a TV miniseries, but I really like him in this movie, and I think Hector's a great character. So, because Hector is kind of the guy who's constantly trying to save his city. That's all his concern is. And it's easy to like Hector a lot because he has very honorable goals, and it's easy to hate Paris because Paris is a whiny little bitch. And that's how Orlando Bloom plays him. And it's odd that this movie wants us so badly, seemingly to not like Paris, but at the same time to root for his relationship with Helen. It also doesn't help that Orlando Bloom and Diane Kruger have no chemistry. None. You could put any two people in the room and have them just talk at each other. This great love affair doesn't land at all. And Paris is an unlikable character, and Helen honestly isn't in the movie enough to make much of an impact. But, I mean, this script makes some weird decisions with the story. It does. So, as far as the director's cut goes, it's mostly just scene extensions, more blood, and more nudity. You actually see Diane Kruger's breast, yay. You see, like I said, the battle scenes are gorier, and it is cool that this movie was made it for a hard R, and I like that. There's actually relatively few of these big battle movies that were, and that does help set it aside. That makes the battles feel a lot more real and more intense, and that's really cool, actually. You see people getting crushed by chariots, just blood sprays, throats torn out, body, a really great decapitation towards the end that was hilarious, where Brad Pitt just straight up cuts a dude's head off. You're like, there can be only one. But yeah, it's generally very. The battle scenes themselves look really good. But the thing is that this movie is directed by a German filmmaker named Wolfgang Peterson. Now, I looked at his filmography, and the issue I have with the way this movie looks is pretty much goes throughout his entire filmography, that his movies tend to look like TV movies. He doesn't make particularly good-looking films, and I'm not sure why, because most of his movies had huge budgets, but they always felt small, and they always felt TV-sized. He did Das Boot, which is a German submarine movie, which I never saw, but that was his breakthrough into America because that was a major hit. And then he did The Never-Ending Story, which I always thought looked like a glorified children's TV show. I know that movie has a lot of love for it, but still, I don't think it's a good-looking movie. I'm not saying it's a bad movie. I don't think it's a good-looking movie, though. Like, I like Troy, but I don't think it's a good-looking movie, especially. He did some stuff in the 90s, In the Line of Fire, Air Force One. He did that remake of Poseidon, which kind of killed his career. The one with Kurt Russell that came out in the late 2000s, right after this. But yeah, his movies don't look good, and as expensive as this movie is, something about it doesn't look great. The interiors especially just look very bland. They're big, but I look at them and then I compare them to something like Gladiator or even Caligula, and those movies had really impressive sets that really, made your jaw drop. It's like, wow, that thing looks incredible. And this movie, so many of the interiors just look like slightly better than something you'd see on Game of Thrones. I mean, it's not that impressive. Now, they used digital effects pretty sparingly. It was mostly just to increase the size of crowds. So a lot of it is practical, and it does look cool because it's practical. But, yeah, like I said, the battle scenes look good, but most everything else doesn't particularly. As far as the acting goes, one of the reasons this movie has got a memory hold a little bit is because Brad Pitt kind of disowned it. Brad Pitt wasn't particularly happy with it, and then a lot of the reason for that is because Brad Pitt's performance did not get good reviews. A lot of people said he just doesn't work as Achilles. But then again, people said Diane Kruger isn't pretty enough to be Helen, and Diane Kruger's a beautiful woman. These characters are literal legends, so it's hard to really live up to that. What I think the issue comes down to with Brad Pitt is that I don't know that he and the director were in full agreement on just how much of a anti-hero Achilles actually is. It seems like Achilles was written in this movie to be pretty ruthless, more sort of a Mad Max type character, but it feels like the movie at times is worried you won't like Brad Pitt, so they try to soften him, and it makes a somewhat uneven viewing experience. Now, Brad Pitt is good in certain scenes of this movie, and he's a little awkward in others. Speaking of awkward, Diane Kruger's accent, is awkward as hell. I actually thought for a little while that maybe that was supposed to be a reference to her. Not they don't ever really say exactly where she's come from. The character Helen, what her nationality is. So I thought maybe they were trying to do something with that. Then I realized, nah, that's just Diane Kruger struggling with the accent, and her accent is the worst in the movie. Brian Cox's Agamemnon is chewing the scenery a little bit. He's going a little too hammy with it, but he's okay. Peter O'Toole is great. Eric Bana is great. Most of the rest of the cast is pretty solid, honestly. Like, I don't like Orlando Bloom in this movie, but his performance is fine. Rose Byrne is in this movie. Now, she's mostly known for comedies now, but this was back when she was more of a serious actress, like when she was doing that show Damages with Glenn Close. And she is solid in it. She plays, I believe, a niece to the King of Troy who's a priestess that gets kidnapped in the first battle of the war and is taken by Achilles as a slave, essentially. But they kind of had this relationship start up, and Rose Byrne's good in this. So yeah. And another huge difference is that this movie condenses what was supposed to be a 10-year battle into what seems to be about a month. And it's kind of hilarious to think that the most notorious battle the world has ever known only lasted a month. Now, from most historical records would say it did last closer to 10 years. And they even have references in this movie where they kind of say, this battle could last 10 years. They have enough provisions in Troy to last 10 years, but still it's clear that the movie takes place over the course of about 4 weeks. And I say that because people who get it, well, first off, people don't age. But second, you'll see people who get an injury at the beginning of the movie, and it's just beginning to heal by the end of it. Rose Byrne especially, she gets a little roughed up at the beginning of the movie, and by the end of the movie, it's slightly healed scratches on her face. So yeah, that was an odd choice. And like I said, there are a lot of strange choices with this script. As far as making Peterson as unlikable as he is was an odd choice. Trying to make Achilles the lead was kind of a strange choice because, again, the movie kind of tries to make it sound like the whole battle hinges on whether or not Achilles fights alongside the Greeks, but that ultimately isn't even true because it's Odysseus, played by Sean Bean, who comes up with the Trojan horse, which is the actual defining moment of the war. So, and Sean Bean, of course, who started in the first season of Game of Thrones, he was in Goldeneye, ton of acting credits. Guy is aging well, too. Like, he looked about 40 in this movie, and 15 years later, he looks about 45. He hasn't aged much now. Like, with Brad Pitt, you sort of expect that, because the guy has enough money to buy himself youth. But, Sean Bean is aging well. This movie was kind of a non-starter for both Orlando Bloom and Eric Bana. It was supposed to be sort of a breakout role for both of them, who were not especially well known. Orlando Bloom more so than Eric Bana, but it didn't really help either one's career all that much in the long run. And because it cost so much, I think it just barely broke even. It would have had to make so much money to really turn a profit. This was really an over-budgeted film. And as far as the length, the director's cut is over 3 hours. The theatrical cut is just a little under 3 hours. But I actually like it because I don't find this to be a very drawn-out movie. I think it's actually pretty fast-paced, and in between, a solid ensemble of characters. These characters are interesting. The battles are good. I don't mind the longer running time, and I do prefer the director's cut. So, as far as changes that they made that were weird, the biggest and most obvious one is Menelaus, the brother of the king of Greece, the people fighting against the Trojans. Helen's original husband, the person she's stolen from and is supposed to be getting it back to, is they kill him right at the beginning of the war. He dies very early. Now, most other text would say that Menelaus survived the whole Trojan War. He lived through the whole Trojan War, so did Agamemnon. So that was a very strange choice, and I honestly don't know why they did that, because it creates this weird thing where even in the movie someone points out, why are we still here? Menelaus is dead. We can't give Helen back to him. This doesn't matter anymore. And of course, Agamemnon's just using it as a pretext for the war because he wants to conquer Troy, because he's trying to take over the whole of modern of the known world at that time, what they knew of the world.
Whoever submit to a foreign ruler,
Then every son of Troy shall die.
This movie is also interesting because it takes the position that Agamemnon's a villain, and Brian Cox very much plays him as a villain. Like I said, he's really kind of overacting, but that's not really how he was necessarily considered in historical text, because at that time, expanding your empire was kind of considered to be a kingly thing to do. It was what you wanted to do. It was a natural part of being, as long as you weren't a straight up warlord like Genghis Khan or something. So the idea that Agamemnon's a villain is really kind of new-ish, a newish idea. And it would have also landed better if you rooted more for Paris. Like I said, Paris, he just comes across like a selfish prick. Now, he and Helen are supposed to be the same age, but he does come across much younger than her and very naive and very kind of stupid, not to mention cowardly. He's a straight up coward in this movie. Like the scene where he's cowering at Hector's feet because Menelaus just beat the brakes off him is pretty funny, especially if you don't like Orlando Bloom. And I'm not a particular fan of Orlando Bloom, so I thought that was really entertaining. But yeah, and speaking of that, Achilles, who dies during the during the final battle, the sack of Troy, was supposed to have died earlier, but was still killed by Paris. Paris, there's two popular versions of it. One, Paris got him with a poisoned arrow in the heel, hence the Achilles heel line. And the other one being that Paris killed him while he was trying to marry the Rose Byrne character, which would have effectively was supposed to create a truce in the war, sort of, and it was supposed to, essentially end the war. And Paris killed him because if the war ended, he was pretty sure he'd have to give up Helen. So either way, Paris was a prick. He either cheated or assassinated him. But yeah, so they're kind of going with that. Only it happens during the sacking of Troy. But Paris also would have been dead by then. Paris was supposed to have died before the final battle of Troy as well. So we get to the Trojan horse, and the final battle of Troy is brutal, man. Like, they're raping women and killing babies. Like, it's honestly surprising they put that into a studio film. But yeah, it's a very long movie, but it's generally a pretty solid movie. They just made some really weird choices with the way they tried to structure it, as far as making Achilles the lead. Oh, and speaking of, with the Iliad actually ends with Hector's death. So it doesn't even cover the final battles of the war. It just sort of implies what will happen. So if they had, that would have been really awkward for this movie. But the battle between Hector and Achilles is fantastic. And supposedly, I think Eric Bana got hit by Brad Pitt during that, for real, like 15 times. And Eric Bana didn't touch Brad Pitt once, which you could say shows that Eric Bana was much more disciplined. But you could also say that Eric Bana was just smart and knew that he wasn't supposed to land a hit on the $25 billion movie star. It's because he's the Australian guy from Chopper, and Brad Pitt's the guy from Fight Club and Seven and Interview with a Vampire. So yeah, that fight sequence is really impressive, and because you do care so much about Eric Bana when he dies, it does have impact. It's a good fight, and like I said, Wolfgang Peterson just isn't a very good director, and the parts of the movie that don't work because of him. I feel like a stronger hand, because Brian Cox has been good in other things. I feel like a stronger hand could have guided Brian Cox a little bit. Maybe would have had a better, more firm grip on how Paris and Helen should interact, and just generally structure this thing a little better. But it's not a bad movie at all, and I actually think it's a movie that deserves to be kind of reassessed, or at least remembered. No one talks about this movie anymore. So it's one of the better movies that Brad Pitt has starred in. I would say it's not the best by any means, but it's one of the better ones. I mean, you still hear about Mr. and Mrs. Smith all the time, which I personally found to be a pretty middle-of-the-road flick. But, yeah, so I think that Troy is worth watching, and I think it's an entertaining little movie. Well, it's not little, it's over 3 hours, but it's a good way to kill a whole afternoon. This would be a better way of putting it. I'm not sure if it's on any streaming services right now, but I like it, and I do recommend the director's cut over the theatrical, just because you get the extra violence in the battle scenes alone is worth it. You also see a little bit more of one of my favorite minor characters in the movie, Tyler Mane, or Taylor Mane, no, I think it's Tyler Mane. The guy who played Michael Myers in Rob Zombie's Halloween, who plays Ajax, this giant dude who's running around throwing over horses. That's friggin' awesome. And also, another actor who's in this that's kind of interesting is Garrett Hedlund, the kid who starred in that Tron sequel no one liked, Tron Legacy. He plays Achilles, Brad Pitt's character's cousin. which is interesting because they changed that around. His cousin Patroclus is supposed to be older than him, but he's very much younger than him. They call him a boy a couple times. So that was another weird choice. And also, some historical texts suggest that Achilles and Patroclus were lovers. And I actually remember when this movie was released, there was this kind of minor controversy about how they were taking the gay content out of the storyline. But that's not entirely true because the Iliad never explicitly states that, well, it actually never states at all, just that they were close companions and friends. But Achilles and Patroclus, some people said, should have been gay lovers, and they're not in the movie, and that was offensive. So that even happened 15 years ago. But I actually looked into that as far as why that would have even been, and apparently in what we would call maybe an apprenticeship today, if an older man took a younger boy as his apprentice, essentially, a sexual relationship was more or less implied as part of the power dynamic, which is creepy and weird, but different times. So, yeah, that's about all I got on Troy. I was glad I rewatched this. I enjoyed it. I still think that it's a worthwhile. It's one of the better big budget movies of the 2000s, and I like that the hard R rating alone makes this thing worth watching because you get to see some spectacular battle scenes, and that by itself makes this thing worth watching. That's it.